On this 4th of July, we think about red, white, and blue. And it's also the Sabbath, so we think about what would Jesus do? Protests are as American as the Boston Tea Party. It is estimated that the riot that gave birth to this country resulted in $2 million worth of property damage. That much green tea being imported by the East India Company from China on American-owned ships was dumped into Boston Harbor by the protesting Sons of Liberty, masquerading in the dress of Mohawk or Narragansett native tribesmen in order to make a point. They were independent spirits. They were defiant. They were unbowed. They were unruly, and they would not be defeated. Many strong opponents of British rule, George Washington among them, denounced acts of lawlessness and violence, especially against private property. Benjamin Franklin insisted that the East India Company be reimbursed for the lost tea, and even offered to pay for it himself. Columnist Joshua Lawson noted, though many witnessed the event's aftermath, it was moonlit covert act completed in 3 hours. No harm came to the ships and crews. No violence or confrontations of any kind took place between the British soldiers, the colonial patriots, or the Tory loyalists that night. Except for the tea, the only property that was damaged was a single broken padlock on one of the ships, which was replaced the very next day by the patriots. The sole injury was to one of the patriots who was knocked unconscious when he was struck by a crate of tea. The results of the Boston Tea Party demonstration? Well, Parliament in the UK passed a series of punitive measures meant to teach the rebellious colonists who was the boss. The reaction of the citizens here in mass to the British sanctions, well, it mobilized Americans to make the Declaration of Independence and to fight the following war for independence. Some have suggested today that the Boston Tea Party is analogous to the violent property destruction that has followed George Floyd's horrific death. But in order for that to be true, the patriots would have destroyed the property of the countrymen, threatened members of the militia companies that were not from their company, rioted in the streets of Boston, and burned down the homes and businesses of their neighbors, none of which happened, of course. Another justification for the violence in these recent days is the meme picturing Jesus turning tables in the temple while using a whip to threaten the money changers. The caption says, if someone asks, what would Jesus do? Remind them that turning over tables and breaking out whips is a real possibility according to the Bible. But who or what did Jesus drive from the temple? It was Passover week in Palestine. Worshippers were coming to the temple at Jerusalem from all over Palestine and even from distant countries to make their pilgrimage as convenient as possible. Foreign money exchange and many animals for sacrificial offerings were available in the temple. This created an environment, however, for religious commercialization and profiteering, and an opportunity for fraud and extortion and abuse. Under these conditions, who was suffering the most? The blind, the lame, the deaf, they were all there. So were the sick. and the dying, and those too poor to satisfy their own hunger every day, but who would gladly offer up a sacrificial animal if one could be purchased at a fair price. And into this scene, Jesus, who was raised poor, entered. And when he looked around, he must do something. With a prophetic eye, he looks into the future and sees not only years, but centuries and ages. And he sees how the love of God will be concealed from sinners, and some will make merchandise of his grace. The attention of the people is attracted to him. The eyes of those engaged in their unholy traffic are riveted on his face. They cannot withdraw their gaze. In the book, Desire of Ages, on page 257, it says, "The confusion is hushed. The sound of traffic and bargaining has ceased. The silence becomes painful. A sense of awe overpowers the assembly. It is as if they were arraigned before the tribunal of God to answer for their deeds. Looking to Christ, they behold divinity flashing through the garb of humanity." Ah, yes, you could hear the ringing sounds of coins hitting the marble pavement. But at no point did Jesus endanger or harm humans, the foreign money exchangers, or the animal handlers. To make this event of Jesus analogous to the violence we've seen here these past weeks in our country as well as worldwide, in his protest, our Lord would have harmed innocent bystanders, destroyed their property, and burned down their homes and businesses, none of which happened, of course. To the contrary, Jesus acted on behalf of the people very much like those being victimized by the violence here in recent days. So, if violence is the wrong way to respond to Mr. Floyd's death and other injustices, what is the right way? Representative John Lewis, an icon of the civil rights movement, stated a few days ago, "Rioting, looting, and burning is not the way. Organize, demonstrate, sit in, stand up, vote. Be constructive, not destructive." History has proved time and again that nonviolent, peaceful protests is the way to achieve the justice and equality that we all deserve. Let's apply the teachings of Jesus to our current crisis of racism and injustice. First, taking the precepts of Representative Lewis in reverse order, we must be sure that we are not part of the problem. Jesus taught us, if you enter your place of worship and about to make an offering, you suddenly remember a grudge a friend has against you, abandon your offering, leave immediately, go to the friend and make things right. Then, and only then, come back and work things out with God. In the context of racism, how do we know if a friend has a grudge against you? Ask the Lord to bring to mind any attitudes, words, and actions or inactions that have offended someone of a different race. Then ask someone of a different race the same question. If needed, do all we can to seek forgiveness and reconciliation. Second, we should find ways to be part of the solution. Jesus commissioned us to make disciples of all nations. The Greek word for nations is ethnos, from which we get the modern word ethnicities. In response to the gospel commission, early Christians welcomed people from 15 different language groups to the fellowship of the believers. And then they shared Christ with Samaritans and Gentiles and slaves and women, thus breaking down every cultural barrier in their day. You and I cannot do all that must be done to combat racism and injustice in our culture, but we can do something. We each have been given resources, abilities, spiritual gifts, and influence that can make a real difference in other people's lives and in our society. We must not allow the enormity of the crisis to keep us from doing what we can in response. To follow Jesus' teachings, we need to be like Jesus. We need his love for all people and his bold initiative to make a difference. Oswald Chambers, a contemporary of Ellen G. White, advised us, never trust anything but the grace of God in yourself or in anyone else. How can we grow in such grace? Chambers again. God expects my personal life to be a Bethlehem, a birthplace for God, a home for God. So, on this 4th of July Sabbath, am I following my natural life to be am I allowing my natural life to be slowly transformed by the indwelling life of the Son of God? God's ultimate purpose is that his Son might be manifest in my mortal flesh and in the flesh of all brothers and sisters until we are found in a loving community that is so noticeable that the overseeing world says, "Look how they love each other. They must have been with Jesus." Will you ask Jesus to manifest himself in your courageous compassion today? Be safe. Be well. God keep you until we have the privilege of seeing each other again.